Britain accused Iran Thursday of holding the world's economy hostage. This comes as the UK brought together more than 40 countries for talks on ways to open the Strait of Hormuz. The US did not take part. Shipping through the strait has slowed to a trickle after weeks of Iranian attacks on commercial vessels. At least 23 incidents have been reported since late February, when the US and Israel started the war by attacking Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage between Iran and Oman that connects the Persian Gulf to global shipping lanes. Normally, about 20% of the world's oil and gas supply passes through this waterway. Sal Mercogliano is a history professor at Campbell University in North Carolina with a focus on maritime policy. Sal, welcome back to the day. Let me start with the latest. You have Trump pushing allies and Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, Macron rejecting a military option, Starmer's meeting today. How serious is this moment for global shipping?
Oh, I think this is probably one of the most serious moments we've seen in global shipping since the 60s, when the Suez closed during the Six-Day War. We're seeing right now a trickle of traffic coming through the Strait of Hormuz. And more importantly, that disruption is going to start hitting the ports in Europe any day now. So that bubble that's been created by stopping ships after February 28th, that's going to start hitting. And we're going to start really to feel those effects now.
People hear closure and they think total blockade, but Iran doesn't need to fully shut the strait to cause disruption, right?
No, they don't. As a matter of fact, one of the things we're starting to see right now is we're starting to see some ships come through, but really under the control of the Iranians. They've basically set up a toll booth where they're running ships into their own territorial waters. We believe they're charging money to go through, and they're being selective in what ships go through. Now, there may be some ships that are going to start breaking that. We're getting indications of some ships running close to the Omani coast right now that may be trying to break out. The problem is Iran is basically in de facto control. They haven't closed the strait, but they are controlling who goes in and out.
How do insurers feel about that?
Well, I think the insurance is really the big issue. One of the big problems is if you start paying off Iran, that could get you into problems with sanctions because you're doing business with the Iranian government. For insurance companies, for the insurers of the ships, which are basically the ship companies, that's the way marine insurance works, they're very comfortable to sit back and wait and see what happens here. Even though it's been a month, they're happy to kind of sit back. What they don't want to do is lose a ship and a crew and potentially impact their revenue over the next 10, 15 years.
So would you say this is a way that some shipping companies are now going down as a way to sort of pay ransom for their vessels that are stranded in the Gulf? Is this something that could work long term, or are insurance companies going to say, no, that's not going to happen? How is this going to evolve?
Yeah, we saw a very similar thing in the Red Sea with the Houthis, where basically the Houthis were kind of, really kind of just getting money out of shipping companies. We saw issues with that, but there was an alternative in the case of the Houthis where you can go around Africa. There's no real big workaround of the Persian Gulf. We do have some pipelines that exist, but nowhere near to the capacity. And during the tanker war of the 1980s, we saw insurance companies, basically you had to pay that excessive insurance, rates of up to 5 to 10% of the value of the vessel. Normally you're under 1%. So again, if we want to see traffic resume through the Strait of Hormuz, we're either going to see higher insurance rates, which means higher cost for consumers, or you're paying off the Iranians, but that still will probably net you higher insurance rates because no one's exactly sure what the Iranians are going to do.
Western countries, you've been following the discussion, as I'm sure you have been. They've been talking about escorting tankers and clearing mines, but doesn't this kind of miss the point if the issue is conditional access rather than a real physical blockage?
I think it does. And escorts only get you a fraction of the ships through there. On a normal day, you have about 138 ships running through the Strait of Hormuz. Convoying may get you half a dozen to a dozen vessels. It's not going to give you the throughput you need. Obviously, the issue here is to resolve the issues between the United States, Israel, and Iran, which are very hard to see that that's going to be worked out anytime in the near future. Escorting mines are the worst case. I mean, if mines start being dropped into the Strait of Hormuz, that effectively will close the Strait of Hormuz because no one's going to take a chance of running through potentially mined waters.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. It doesn't really look like they have been dropping mines because Iran has reportedly doubled its daily earnings from oil sales since the beginning of the war. How did they manage to pull that off, the situation in the Strait being what it is?
Yeah, there is no indication of mines having been dropped yet. And matter of fact, every report we're seeing is it's been clear. What Iran has done is basically pulled ships out from the center of the Strait of Hormuz and required them to come through the territorial waters of Iran. So Iran has set up basically a toll booth. They're running ships between two islands, Qishim and Larak Island. We believe that there may be payoffs for to go through, potentially up to $2 million. Not exactly sure how that's being paid or in what denomination. But we think that the Iranians have set up the system, and we've seen shipping come out. But it's important to note that the total amount of shipping we've seen come out, during this past month of March isn't equal to 1 day's worth of travel through the Persian Gulf prior to February 28th. So we're just seeing a very minuscule amount of ships moving through right now.
But they're also exporting their own oil, aren't they?
Iran has been able to do that. We've been seeing loadouts at Karg Island. They are freely flowing their goods to the point that the United States has actually desanctioned Iranian oil, which is an amazing issue because, again, the U.S. was trying to hurt the Iranians, and one way to do that is their oil industry. Their fleet of very large crude carriers and other tankers were prime targets. The U.S. has demonstrated the ability to capture tankers. They did that during the Venezuelan conflict. That option existed for the U.S., but instead what they've done is allow that oil not just to sail, but unsanction it and sell it to literally any market out there. I think one of the things you're seeing the Trump administration trying to do is control the price of gasoline and diesel fuel in the United States. They've been able to check that rise. It's a lot less than what you're seeing, for example, in Europe, but they're not going to be able to control it entirely. And matter of fact, what we're going to start to see is greater and greater spikes in that. So even letting Iranian oil out will not suffice here to provide the world with the oil it needs with this disruption.
Yeah. The Strait's territorial waters are split between Iran and Oman, and the Iranian foreign minister says that the future of the Strait should be decided by these two countries only. What, if any, role has Oman played in the dispute over the shipping route?
Well, Oman has literally the chunk of the Strait of Hormuz in its territorial waters. And what we've seen from Oman is very little so far. We know the UAE, for example, has been providing a lot of protection for ships. They've been used as a staging base. Oman, however, does control the southern shore of the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, I'm literally watching several ships run through Omani waters in the southern half of the strait. That could be the alternative to the Iranian toll booth. If you run through the southern half of the strait, outside the traffic separation scheme along the coast of Oman, that may be an alternative that is developing here right now for ships to get out. The question really comes back to international law. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, this is an international seaway. No one technically controls it. Neither Iran nor Oman can stop the free passage of vessels through the strait. That is Section 19 of the Charter. Unfortunately, not everyone follows the law of the sea.
What could be the legal implications then if a shipping company decided, we need to pay this toll, we want to get our oil out into the world? What could be the consequences for them if they were then part of this breach of international law?
If you play Iran that money, then you may wind up being on a sanctions list. You may not be able to do business in all the countries that you want to do. You may not be able to operate in Europe or the United States or in some others of the G7 nations. However, it's important to note one of the things we've been seeing develop over the past years, particularly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is the creation of this dark fleet. This fleet of vessels that operate outside the bounds of normal shipping. They don't conform to, using insurance from the main insurance groups. They're not registered in traditional states. They're not being inspected in countries where, regulations are being enforced. They could conceivably operate in Iran and go to countries like India or China and deliver fuel outside those reaches. And what we may be seeing is the growth of this parallel fleet, a separate fleet of vessels that is engaged solely in the movement of oil from countries like Russia and Iran.
Sal Mercogliano of Campbell University in North Carolina, thank you so much for these fascinating insights. Always great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.